Welcome everyone to today's SC Chats. We are going to talk about having blunt discussions that lead to positive and powerful conversations. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Lisa Terry. I'm an early intervention professional development consultant with the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. And today we have Micah Lee joining us today. And Micah, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Micah Lee. I am a service coordinator and developmental educator at the Infant and Toddler Connection of Central Virginia, so Lynchburg and surrounding areas. I have worked here for almost 5 years at this point, and I'm excited to help engage everyone in this conversation today.
Thank you, Micah. So in this session today, actually, let me back up. I'm skipping ahead. What we'd like to do is know how long you've been a service coordinator first. So you are going to use your stamp feature. And to get to that, you're going to scroll up to the top where it says View Options and click Annotate and then choose the stamp. You can choose like a heart, star. There's a whole array of options for you. And just drop the stamp of how long you've been a service coordinator for us. Look at all that color coming up on screen. I love it. And I like how some of you are really using that timeline to try to get the exact amount of years in there too, which is great. So it looks like we have some that are between 0 to 5 years, some between 5 to 10, and then we have quite a few actually that are have really been in this profession for a long time. And if you're in a blended role, if you want to just type your other discipline in the chat box too, so if you're a service coordinator as well as another discipline, just drop that into the chat. So it looks like we have developmental services provider and local system manager too. Another developmental services provider, SLP, PT. Oh, 2 SLPs watching here. I'm glad y'all can join together. Yep, another early social worker, local system manager, developmental services. So we have quite a few other disciplines as well. Well, we're really excited that you are here today. And Micah, she's also in a blended role as a service coordinator and developmental services provider too. And Seth, if you don't mind going ahead and clearing the screen, and then if everyone just can go ahead and hit that red X on your screen to clear off the annotation tool so we don't have any popping hearts and popping stars that just will keep on going through the slideshow. We'll use the stamp feature again though, so I'll give you directions again on how to access that. So today we are going to really just chat about having those honest conversations with families in early intervention. So just to get us really thinking about that, actually we're going to use the stamp tool again now. I want you all to really consider what your comfort level is with having these honest conversations. And we have these fun little emojis popping up now. So if you're uncomfortable, if it really just depends on the situation, if you feel very comfortable, or if you're like, I got this, I feel really confident, go ahead and go back to view options and annotate and choose the stamp that really fits best with how you feel about having honest conversations with families. And I apologize, my allergies just started acting up, so you might hear me sniffling, maybe sneezing. Okay, so it looks like some kind of depends on the situation to comfortable, some comfortable to confident. We got a rock star X in the sunglasses. On the sunglasses.
I'm guessing that person is a social worker.
Yeah, right. Has lots of experience having these honest conversations with people. Right.
That's
And
right.
it can really just vary. I know, like for me, sometimes it really just depends on the situation, like where I feel a little bit more anxious when I'm having some conversations with families. And then there's other times I feel really confident having those conversations. And then other times I might feel really comfortable. Sometimes, if it's a situation that I've never been in before, then I might feel a little bit more uncomfortable just because I haven't had that experience yet. So we're going to really talk about that. And Mike, I think you said too that initiating the conversation sometimes, right? Like that's like a big piece of it. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that I've been thinking about in preparing for this was really how to begin the difficult conversation and how to approach it in a fashion that doesn't start out with sending the family on the defense or sending another provider on the defense. Because our natural tendency, as soon as someone has something to say, as far as like, I'm going to need you to do this for me, or I need you to fix this, it often becomes like it's not my fault, it's so and so's fault. And so um, I I think that one of the reasons that I have a really good approach to difficult conversations is because when I am starting them, I don't start out accusatory. I always start out with a, hey, I want to come out and have a chat with you. And then when I get out there, I I approach it as like a, hey, I've noticed that you're having a difficult time holding appointments and that your physical therapist has contacted me and let me know that some of the appointments are being canceled at the last minute. I would like to sit down and figure out what can we do together to help remedy this situation. Is it something that we're doing? Is it the provider that you don't feel comfortable with? Is life just too crazy right now? Do you have too many appointments? And rather than approaching it as you're not keeping your appointments, it's an approach of, I can see that you're not keeping your appointments and kind of calling them out on it. But the follow up with, how can I help you not have to cancel them? Is it that our frequency is too high? Is it something we're doing? Is it the provider you don't feel like a good fit, but you're too embarrassed to have a conversation that says, I don't really like them? That's a really hard discussion to have with somebody, to say, I don't really like the therapist that we've been assigned. And so sometimes opening the conversation and asking how it can be remedied together makes them more likely to be less defensive and more willing to actually talk through and come up with some solutions.
Yeah. And I think it's you showing that you care and you're really seeking to understand the situation a little bit more too.
Absolutely.
Stacey shared in the chat that sometimes, even when you feel comfortable with those conversations, you're apprehensive, as you know, it's an uncomfortable topic for those involved, and you can't control how others will respond to the conversation. Yeah. So there's a lot of unknown variables that kind of get thrown in there as well, too. Especially because you're like, how are they going to respond to me? Like, what do I say back if they say, come at me in like more negative way too? So I think really trying to um, be okay with that uncomfortable position, but know that it's one of those conversations that can be more powerful because you can get down and discover like more the meaning behind it and what's going on. And it's that partnership, right? Like you're really partnering
Absolutely.
with the family. And I think as long as the families know that, that's where we can just keep moving forward. All right, so Seth, if you can go ahead and again, clear the beautiful hearts and stars and check marks. Thank you. So when we first met to kind of plan the service coordinator chat discussion today, you really emphasize the importance about having those honest conversations with families. But can you just elaborate a little bit more about the context and the situations that might arise when you're having these honest conversations?
Sure. So I've mentioned a few of them, but a lot of times in our role, it revolves around not holding appointments or consistently canceling or not following through with services. And so the parents maybe are getting frustrated that the child isn't making progress, but the provider is also frustrated because clearly the parents aren't following through with any of the suggestions that are being made. And with a coaching model, that's kind of how we see progress, is that we give you the suggestions and the tools, and then you implement them every day, and then we see the progress. And so, so sometimes it revolves around the appointment keeping, or constantly changing, or canceling when I'm already on my way to your house. Sometimes it revolves around not following through with the services, saying you want the services, but not really wanting to do anything that we're asking you to do at the appointments. And then sometimes it's having a difficult, honest conversation with a provider, which can be hard too. This doesn't just apply to our families. It can also apply to having to have a difficult conversation with one of our providers if a family is having difficulty with them, or if you yourself are having an issue with them.
Yeah, and I think that there's just so many different situations that you can find yourself in it, and it's really just facing that situation. I know, like, sometimes, especially when I first started, I was like an avoider, so I tended to avoid any kind of conflict, or any kind of conversations that would create that conflict, and so I would just avoid it and just follow the process. But I love how facing it sometimes can really build that partnership a lot more with the family, but also maybe there's something that we miss. Maybe we're not aligning their priorities with what's going on. And so really just having that conversation and figuring it out, I think will help. But I would love to know what other situations do you all find that may be challenging to discuss? So if you want to go ahead and type that into chat, what are some other situations that you find may be challenging to discuss? I know for me, one of them, Micah, was anytime like the family needs, like the caregiver needs some kind of like mental health support. I find that really challenging sometimes, and really getting them to follow through. Like they know that they need it, but just the follow through on seeking that support. And sometimes it's hard to even find providers that will give you that, or give them that mental health support too.
Yes. Yeah, and I see Janine said making a CPS report. Absolutely. Been there, done that. And usually the parents can figure out who made the call. If you were out doing a 6-month review or an annual in the home, and the next day CPS is knocking on their door, it's not that hard to figure out who it came from. And absolutely, it is a very difficult conversation that that will, especially if they try to come to you and have a discussion about it. And yeah, actually, Lisa and I were talking about discussing autism and seeing a specialist, or seeing different things in an assessment that concern the providers and ourselves. And it's two different ends of the spectrum, where it's the parents who are concerned about it and asking you about it, knowing that we can't diagnose that in the room there. And then also parents who are completely, they don't have any knowledge of autism, and they don't realize that that's kind of what's being displayed in the room. And we're all aware of it, but they're not aware of it at all, and how to have that really tough conversation about needing to see somebody who can diagnose that when we can't.
Yeah, and that's definitely those situations where we have to determine, like, is it because we feel uncomfortable and we don't want to have those conversations that we're avoiding them? Because especially in those cases, like, it's our job really to talk about these characteristics that we're seeing and share that with families and be honest with them. And a lot of the research does show that families want that honesty. Yes, it's hard for them to hear, but they do want that honesty. And so just knowing that it's okay to go through that and have that conversation, but just be self-aware of it's our own feelings of discomfort during it, or because we feel bad, and that's
sometimes I just want to cry for them.
Exactly.
Because it's a long haul, when your 2-year-old comes in and it's something that needs further assessing, and will probably need some lifelong help along the way. And so it's hard as a mom, even just as a parent, to have that conversation, knowing that if I was on the receiving end, it would be very difficult. And if a parent ever starts to cry, you can best bet I'm going to be right there crying with them, because I cannot help myself.
Right.
I am a crier. So if they
Yeah,
start crying, I'm done for.
I know. I'm like, don't cry, don't cry. Sonia also
Um,
shared observing discipline issues. Parents can become very defensive about this topic.
Yeah, and Suzanne mentioned discipline strategies and development as well. And we're going to touch base on that actually in
Yes.
one of our scenarios. So I'm gonna touch base on the discipline techniques and differences in part of our discussion today.
Yes. Yep. And then also when parents disagree with each other about the child's needs. Yes. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of it is very like reflective. Like you have to really have these reflective practices to go through with the families too, to really get to the end goal and find some kind of common grounds with that too.
For sure.
All right. So we know that it can be difficult, but we also know that establishing and building that rapport with the family, that's really essential, right? So tell me a little bit, Micah, about how you're establishing that relationship with the family.
So I am pretty personable anyway. But one thing that I think is really special about the way that I was created is that I am able to go into any home and treat everybody the same. It doesn't matter where you came from or where you're going. I have the ability to make people feel important. And I think that in our role as a service coordinator, it's really important to make sure that the family sees you as part of a team and not as somebody that's better than them, or that you're professional and they're just the family. Because in order to build rapport, they have to trust you, and really that involves them feeling like they can have a conversation with you, or them feeling like you're welcome to come into their house and they're not worried that you're judging if it's clean or not, or if, or what neighborhood it's in. And so really the biggest way that I build rapport is with my families is that I treat everybody the same. Everybody gets the same treatment from me as far as my services, and everybody gets the same kind of conversation from me, regardless of who you are. And so I think it's important to engage with them on like, oh, I heard you guys were going to Disney. That's so exciting. How was it? I can't wait to hear how it was. And showing interest in stuff outside of just the child's development and your job. And then following up with it, remembering it. That goes so far with people if they feel like, even if it is about the job, hey, I remembered that you guys had an appointment this week with the developmental specialist. How did that go? I'd love to hear how that went. And so a lot of it is just really including them in the process and making them feel valuable every step of the way, because really they're our best asset.
Yeah, and that's so true. And yes, Joshua, that connecting, that's such an essential like part of what we're doing with families. I remember, and I'm going to tell on myself something that happened before. I went to this family's home and I entered the door, and this mother, she was so excited because she was like, it's his birthday today. I had no idea that it was his birthday. And so I just felt horrible. And I know that she knew, like, I tried to play it off, but I knew she knew. I was like, oh, it's today. Yes. And happy birthday. But like, I reflect on that moment a lot. And I'm like, I wish I would have like looked at his chart before to check the date of his birthday before I went in. So I could have just like, went like, oh, happy birthday, as soon as I like walked through the door. And so like, that was something I learned to do. Like from that point on, I was like, okay, I'm always going to check their date of birth before I get into the home, because I never want to like be in that situation again, because that is a part of establishing that relationship with families and showing them that you care. Yes. And also, someone shared in the chat too, the first thing is to say their names correctly. Yeah. So she always asks, am I saying your name or your child's name correctly? recently a mom told her that I was the first one that said her name correctly. Yeah, those things matter, right? They matter to families. It's important. We would
Absolutely.
love
And
to.
as I think it's important to remember that I know it can seem awkward to say, am I saying your name correctly? But it's more awkward to be saying it incorrectly. And I feel like people who have names that are different to pronounce would much rather you say, hey, how do I pronounce your name or your child's name, than guessing and saying it wrong, or them having to constantly correct people. I think they'd rather, instead of guessing, just ask.
Yeah, especially if you're saying it wrong for months.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and ask how to say it and say, I'm writing this down because it's important. And that's like one thing too, Janine, that I'm with you on. Like I will do that and I'll like write it out how they pronounce it. So it'll help me remember. Yeah,
Yeah.
helpful for
Oh,
others.
and yes, helpful for other team members if someone ever has to do anything for that kid, so they know. And then the parent knows that you informed them of how to do it. And it's those little things that make all the difference. It's little things that make people feel like you're part of their team rather than someone that's better than them or above them, or that you have more power than they do.
Absolutely. Especially when we're coming in to early intervention too. Like parents might already feel like a little bit of those power dynamics because they're not sure what it's going to look like. They might feel like it's kind of like going to the doctor's office, where there's those power dynamics. So anything to bring us back down. So we would love more tips. So if you were going to, let's say you were training a new service coordinator and you were talking about building a rapport, what kind of tips and strategies would you share with them? What are your big go-tos for establishing a rapport? I think one of my biggest ones for me would be to make sure I'm an active listener. And so when I'm asking them all those great open-ended, meaningful questions, that I'm showing them that I'm listening to and I'm not checked out or trying to, write down other things, but I'm focused on what they're actually saying to me.
Yeah, active listening is really important. And that allows you to remember and go back and ask questions about things that they said when you were there, because you weren't too busy trying to get other things done while you were there. I kind of touched on this earlier with my building rapport with my families, but like I said, I always try to make them know that they're more important in this whole process than I am. And so, and just being real down to earth with them. And, if something happens that's embarrassing or something, sharing a similar story. I've got kids, I get it. I know how kids are. It's not a big deal. And so finding something to connect over, or sharing stories of your own self or people, that way they don't feel so alone.
Yeah. And Suzanne shares always meeting the family where they are. Absolutely. I think that's a really big one too, because we have to kind of check our own biases that we might bring with us in those moments. And Melissa said, staying positive and honest. I often ask parents how long they've lived here. Oh, yeah. And if they grew
I
up in the
love
area.
that.
That's a
I
great
love that.
question.
Yeah.
Recognizing their strengths. Yeah, asking more about their culture and finding out what's unique to them. And I love that too, because you're really investing in their family's culture too. And I think it lets us know what's meaningful for them. Yeah, asking about their story. Yes, Julia. Checking in with them more often than just your monthly visit. It only takes a few minutes to send a text to check in to ask if things are going well. It means so much to them. Absolutely. So these are like ongoing relationships that, we're going to be building with these families for a really long time, especially depends on, how early we get them. Well, thank you. If you have any other strategies, feel free to continue to type those in. And we are going to move into checking your intentions. So Micah, this is like a big thing that you shared. And I'm going to go ahead and pop these questions up on the screen. But if you can just kind of talk us through what it means to you, like when you're thinking about checking intentions.
Sure. So when I was gathering my information for this discussion today, I kept going back to what are my intentions? What do I hope to see come from this conversation? And I think that's really important on our end to straighten that out in our own head before we ever engage in the conversation. So we have to know, like, what is the point of this conversation? What's the purpose? Why are we going out there? There has to be a really good, solid purpose behind the conversation about needing change or needing something different to happen. Asking yourself, what is the change you want to see? So be prepared to have that conversation with the family about, like, this is where the issue is lying and how can we see that change so that it aligns better with helping your child. Then always taking into consideration the family situation. Before any conversation, I'm going to sit and think, do I know anything about this family that would cause the cancellations or the late cancellations or difficulty with the provider, those kinds of things. So sitting back and taking the knowledge of what I know, maybe reading over the IFSP again, the front few pages of the IFSP and seeing if there's anything in there that can tell me. I don't know, what if grandma lives with them and grandma is in chemotherapy twice a week and mom is the driver and mom also has other kids that have sports in the afternoons and mom is trying to work. And so taking into consideration the family's situation and then also during the conversation asking about the situation, because there may be things that they never opened up to you and that you wouldn't have known. I had a family that during COVID we wrote an IFSP for, and it was of course on telehealth and did the whole thing video chat. And at the very end, I was the only person left on the call. This child was significantly delayed, and it was very clear as soon as the camera flipped around that there was something genetic going on that was not in my original paperwork. And so after we wrote the whole IFSP and everybody else logged off, it was just me and the mom. And she says to me, well, I just want you to know I've lost 2 children. What? You've lost 2 children? Yes, I had a 6-year-old with a very rare syndrome who passed away at 6. And then I had a full-term child that passed away right after birth. And I thought to myself, wow, that changes the situation and it changes how I approach her. And it completely changes who she is. Like, as a mom, I cannot imagine being in her shoes, but immediately I understood why that child was 17 months old and just getting referred to our program as delayed as he was. And it was because of her own loss that she wasn't ready to deal with the diagnosis or whatever was to come with this child, that we could look at and see the delays were severe, but she was not in a place. And I had to take that into consideration and I had to let her fool everybody for a while until she was comfortable with them. But she waited until I was the only person on the call to make sure that she mentioned that. And so I think that the situation that the family is in has so much to do with what's really going on behind the scenes and why we're having to have difficult conversations with some people. And then, sorry, that one was a little extended, but also
No,
the last
I love that one, Micah, too. But I mean, like, because I think that's part of the family story. And what we have to remember is that stories come with emotions. And so, like, just for that example, I mean, just those extreme, like, emotions and grief that family must be feeling and that they're carrying with them through their past experiences. I think that's really hard, but it's so helpful for us to know too, because it is going to change how we're supporting them.
I will tell you, so in almost 5 years, I've had a couple of moms on my caseload that have lost children. And because of that experience, I always have more grace for those moms because I have seen a pattern that it's a club that no one wants to be part of, and that is almost impossible to be a normal. You can't be a mom that hasn't lost a child if you have. And so I imagine that not having that having another child, especially when there's a genetic component, that it changes how you parent, and it changes, especially depending on like how much you dealt with it at the time or are currently dealing with it, and how like what their approach to has been to dealing with their loss. And so anytime I have a parent and I find out that there was the loss of a child, I immediately go to a different place with them. Sometimes they're very defensive and are very difficult to have difficult conversations with. But I always go back to, it's not me. It's not me. That there was one mom that lashed out at me she was so angry, but I didn't do anything. And I had to keep reminding myself of that. It's not me she's mad at. She's mad at the world. She can't help it. I would be too. And, and her child that I'm there serving had the same condition as the one she lost. And so I could never put myself in her shoes, never want to, but it really helped me understand how to deal with her, because I knew I always had to remind myself, like, she's not mad at me. I didn't do anything to her. She's angry at the hand that has been dealt, and rightfully so, and she is entitled to that. And so the difficult conversations would happen, and they didn't always go as smoothly as some other ones, but I always walked away going, okay, I know I'm glad we had that conversation and I was able to smooth it over as best as I can, but I have to realize she's not mad at me. And then I'll just touch on the last one. Always wondering if we're going to have a tough conversation, how is this going to be helpful to them? Because there's no point in having an uncomfortable, difficult conversation if it's not going to help anybody. So if we're going to put ourselves in a place where we have to have a difficult conversation, you certainly want it to be fruitful, and you want there to be the purpose behind it of like, this is going to help them and their child in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we'd like for you to do next is consider these questions and which one would be the hardest. And feel free to type in chat like why that might be hard for you, but which one would be the one that might be the hardest to consider. And again, you're going to go to view options at the top and annotate, and then choose stamp. I got to move my boxes all around so I can see the stamps. And for me, I would even think sometimes even the purpose of the conversation, I think, would be hard for me, because I think intentionality is key here. And you do need to be intentional about thinking this through. You really have to pause yourself and like process like every part of it. To even think to have the conversation, and that would bring you to the purpose. So I think that one might be challenging for me. Yeah, so we have
for me, it's probably what do I hope to see change, because I sometimes have to bring myself back to like, what do I want to see change, or what do they want to see change?
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and what if our things are not the same?
Yes, and we're all guilty of that. I mean, there's no way that we're not, because we all have our implicit biases for what we think, for parenting practices, for whatever it is. And so we just have to make sure that we're acknowledging that and kind of like self-checking ourselves, right, Micah, like in that situation. And we do have quite a few for what do you need to consider about the family situation. And then we have a couple on the how will this conversation help the family? And I think when we're thinking about considering the family situation too, like sometimes it can be difficult if it's hard to get information out of the family or they don't feel ready to share that information with you yet. So we don't always know things and what's really going on.
Yeah, and it's not really safe to assume. You
Absolutely.
can gather from seeing things and from conversations, and the providers can tend to be really insightful because they see them more regularly, but it's never safe to assume that something is going on when it's not.
Mhm. And I think that's where that relationship building is so key. And, for me, when I was a new service coordinator, like I just wanted to build a relationship so quickly with families. Like I wanted it immediate. You want that immediate gratification, like of having that rapport with them where they can be open and honest with you. And then quickly I realized that some families, they take a lot longer and that's an okay thing. And I had to let it go because it's not a me thing. Like you were saying before, it's not a me thing. I just had to let it go because it's a process, to get to that point.
I had a mom say to me the other day, the first time I met you, I knew I loved you. I thought, well, that's good. That's
Yep.
what I'm going for.
Yeah, well, there's that goodness of fit and your temperament styles, and sometimes they really work out, sometimes they don't,
That's right.
right away. And that's okay. All right, let's go to the next slide and go ahead and X out of your stamp. And then Seth, if you can go ahead and clear that for us. And let's talk about the commitments. So you mentioned a really great strategy of creating mutual commitments with the service coordinator and the family. So can you just kind of define that for us? Like, what is it exactly? And what kind of tips would you give?
Sure. Okay. So I think probably what we'll do here is get ready to type because you're going to help chat with us. But what this screen is about is how during this difficult conversation, we come up with a list of things that the service coordinator can contribute to help remedy the situation and what the family can do to help remedy the situation, and making sure that the family understands that if there's something that you can do, if they said, well, I really need this, or I would be able to hold those appointments, but the problem is this, and that's something that the service coordinator can help with, coming up with commitments from the family to help remedy the situation, and also commitments from the service coordinator. And so I kind of wanted to give a scenario here that is straight from the book of Micah Lee's Service Coordination Crazy. And so, and actually for like quite a few years of me working here, I was assigned all the families that had any kind of CPS involved or foster families involved or DSS, because my boss recognized that I was very good at having difficult conversations, because she wanted someone in there that could love on the family and then also have a difficult conversation if it needed to be had. So I have lots of crazy stories, but here is one from more recently. I have a family on my caseload that has 2 children on my caseload, both from the same family and brothers. And the baby's in our program he had a pretty significant torticollis. And then the 2-year-old is on my caseload, and he was displaying some pretty wild behavior, very destructive behavior. He's a bit dangerous with a lot of the things he does. And mom is really struggling. Mom also has a school-age child who has a diagnosis of autism. And so he requires a good bit of attention when he's in the home as well and not at school. And I went out to do a visit with the developmental service provider that sees the 2-year-old. And I got out to the house and it was straight chaos. The child's favorite place to hang out is on top of the refrigerator or on top of the kitchen table. And if mom tells him no about anything, he will persist until mom says yes, because she can't take it anymore. And he will sit in, if she tries to put him in his high chair, she has a strap on to like a wooden kitchen chair, and he will jerk himself like this to scoot the chair all over the house. He'll be down the hallway if he has free reign, but it's not safe, especially when he's going sideways and the whole chair is tipping over every time he does it. And I'm watching this, freaking out on the inside, because I'm like, how does she live like this every day? This is so much. And so we went out there to have a discussion with mom about what was going on with this little guy. And he also is obsessed with his mama. And so he wants to be with her all the time and on her or twirling her hair. And so mom was just so overwhelmed. And so I would love it if you guys would type in the chat and try to come up with a few things with that scenario. And I'm out there and we've been having developmental services for a few months. Come up with a few things that you would recommend that could be something the service coordinator could help with as far as this scenario, looking at the scenario that I found myself in and trying to help mom. So I'd love to know like what some of the things you guys think could be how the service coordinator could contribute to the conversation and coming up with a remedy or some help for mom.
And did mom, she did mention like one thing to you, right? Like that she wanted help with?
Well, she was really interested in having a break. She couldn't really afford daycare, but she just needed a little bit of time where she could get her head on straight every day. And so she had asked about the schools, but he was just at the beginning of 2 years old, and our school system is really hesitant to do anything until closer to 3. But also just saying like, I just need somewhere for him to go. Where can he go? So that I can just have a little bit of a break.
Okay. Looks like we have some things coming in the chat now, like possible respite.
Let's see, struggling chaotic visits too. I try to reduce some of the sensory input, such as asking if we could turn the TV off. It's tough for sure. And a lot of times the TV is on, and which is just added noise. This mom she's such a good mom too. She is such a good mom, and she loves those kids so much that she almost just wants to let the chaos reign because that's what they want. And so she's a really good mom. And so she never has TV on actually.
Well, and I think we have to have good like self-care strategies like in place for ourselves, because we are going to be in those moments where it's overwhelming for us being in the home. And so how are we going to keep her calm during that time? Right. And every time I used to have new service coordinators, I would be like, I really want you to go in the mirror, but practice your face. Like be aware of the facial expressions that you make, because I think that's really important, because we don't want to give off the wrong nonverbal cues to the family.
Yeah. And I also will throw out there, this mom had found a babysitter who quit when she was supposed to be coming to the house that day so that mom could take one child to the library just to have some quieter one-on-one time, and the babysitter never showed up. And when she messaged her, she was like, yeah, I just can't handle your kids.
Which
so that
even more stressful for the mother too. Yeah. Asking if either of the kids have waivers or respite, acknowledging, mom struggles. Yes.
Yep. And I always make sure that she knows that I feel for her, because she's trying so hard. And so I always make sure that she knows that I hear her when she voices her concern over the chaos to me.
And I think it's really important that we're building the caregiver's confidence too.
Yes. I would ask mom about her circle of support. Is there anyone in her life that helps and supports her? Good. That's a great route. And yeah, this mom has very little support. Dad, I forgot to mention this in the scenario. The children's dad, it travels for work. So he's gone Monday through Friday, up and down the East Coast traveling for work. And he only comes home on Saturday and Sunday to help her, which is practically single parenting for the most part all week long. And so she does have dad on the weekends to help support her. And I have asked about other family members, but she also has, that's the other difficult conversation. She says she wants a break and that she needs help, but she's very resistant to who can watch her kids and if the grandparents are allowed to stay with them, or if the grandparents are allowed to take them anywhere, or, she's very specific about who she allows to be around the kids as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. And there is, you can always create like an eco map too. Like that's a great thing, activity, I think, to do with families like in this situation. And we do have an archived Talks on Tuesday from earlier this year, and that explains that. If you haven't seen that yet, that might be something you're interested in too.
Awesome. I'm just going to read through some of these and then we'll talk about commitments from the family as well. Community organizations nearby that work with special needs, absolutely. Support from family and friends. Possibly have visits outdoors at a park. Also investigate respite care. Yes, again, respite is difficult only because of who she allows to watch her kids. But also he does love to be outside, but he has no boundaries outside. So you can't take your eyes off of him, and he's jumping off of things off the playground, and he bolts out the door the second the door is unlocked. He is out and running down the road. No safety. No safety. No, he doesn't have any regards for safety. But mom, what we have found a few parks together. We have found a few parks that are completely fenced in, that have a lock that he can't undo. And so mom has a few select parks that she will take him to. Maybe asking if they have a gym membership, as they sometimes have childcare, which would give her some me time. You know, that's a great idea that I don't think I have thought of. I know there is a Y not very far from them that would have childcare. I should ask about that. Several faith-based communities in our area offer respite care events, game nights for families. Perfect. And or mom could make a plan to look for education students with university nearby that would be more likely to want and handle. Yeah, that's a great idea too. Looking and seeing if there's some groups of maybe special ed students, or students who are training to be special ed teachers, who would be able to help mom out. And so really quickly, I'm going to kind of go over the list that I came up with for myself, and with mom together, that I would help her look for either a private-based preschool that could fit him in somewhere close by, so she didn't have to drive too far to get him there. We talked about, we started with a transition plan, even though he was a little bit younger than we normally would start it. Mom was interested in finding out what the Bedford County school system looked like. And so we scheduled a meeting and followed through with that and started that whole process, and had a good, honest discussion where they kind of got to see what a day in the life looks like. And so they are in that process now. And then, yeah, we've talked about some sensory activities, about doing some heavy work, and giving him some jobs that require him to, help with laundry and push the basket around the house and put stuff in his backpack, and have him wear the backpack around to help him kind of keep himself grounded. And so those were all, but some of these ones I didn't think of. So I'm super glad you guys thought of them. And yes, he's doing a few mornings a week at a little local church preschool that's very small. And the family actually started attending church there in hopes that it would get him used to it before he went to the preschool. And so far he's done really well. So now real quickly, let's also go over what are some things that we could compile on a list of commitments that I needed mom to follow through with in order to see some of the chaos calmed. If you want to type in the chat think of some things that that you think mom could maybe commit to doing, or that I could suggest to mom for her list of commitments.
And this would be like more of like a reflective like activity, like with the family, right? Of coming up with those commitments for with the family, like together. So if you're in the home, like you were doing it jointly, and then you were to reflect back with the parent. Okay, so like let's talk about like what you've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Let's think about some of the things that we've talked about, and then that's where you're going to compile your list of commitments. Is that right, Micah?
Yep,
That
yep.
like
So,
okay.
and write them down. Write them down. That way mom can hang it on the fridge and she can see what the discussion was, and she can look at it when she goes to get, the milk jug out. She's like, oh yeah, I haven't done that today. Or, oh yeah, that was something I said I was going to work on, and I haven't done that yet. So let's make sure we're on that.
Yeah, I am such a like visual and hands-on learner too. I'm the same way. So like, for example, when I attend webinars, like I want to write things down, but it also kind of triggers my memory. It like I remember it a little bit more, and then I can go back and reflect on it if I need to, and kind of remind myself about it. It's like a little visual cue that I need. So I think that's helpful.
Yes. So let's see. Follow through on suggestions and how the service coordinator can support mom on follow through. Very often parents ask but don't follow through. Yeah, and that was a big part of this situation, was that there was very little consistency with mom. And so she would tell him no, and then he would pester her enough until mom changed her mind because she was tired of arguing with him. And so some of the things that mom agreed to, she asked me, she said, what is an appropriate timeout for a 2-year-old? And I said, well, if you look it up on Google, it would say 2 minutes. It would say, however old they are, that's how many minutes you would ask them to sit quietly. And so we walked around the house and figured out where a safe place would be, that he could sit on the floor, that that he wouldn't have distractions around him, and that he couldn't hurt himself just in that spot. And we talked through what timeouts can look like for different people, and that timeout is not you kicking and screaming for 2 minutes and then I let you up. So timeout is sitting quietly for 2 minutes and then you get up. And so and talked about follow through on her side, as far as no means no. And if you tell him no, then you really need to stick to your ground on that. And even if I told her, I said, timeout is going to be way harder for you than it is for him, because he's used to going on and on and on until he gets his way. I said, it's really hard to be the person who has to enforce it until he figures out that when my mom says I have to sit here because I was being dangerous, then I have to sit here until the timer goes off. Let's see, mom can also write it down herself. If the parent is illiterate, maybe record. Yeah, you could record it. All right. If they prefer to have, some people remember things by listening, and some people remember things better by reading it. And so, and the mom followed through with her commitment, was following through with the appointments with the developmental provider, who was great about giving her sensory activities and coming up with new activities that would keep him engaged, and really keep his brain churning. Because when he was busy doing something that was important, or what he felt like was a little more, had to put a little more thought into it, he could commit to it, and the chaos would kind of calm down. And so including the mom following through with some of those activities that we noticed would bring him down a notch for a period of time. And mom followed through with all of the appointments, never rescheduled anything with the school system or the preschool, getting him set up for that. She took him by to see the classroom and did all of the things that were perfect for getting him ready to go there without her. And so let's see. List of things that mom would like to see changed in their daily life and routine, starting with her first priority. This way I could try to help mom build some goals around this and also connect her to some resources. Would it be possible for the little boy to have a one-on-one support worker? we have limited options in our area for behavior type issues with under 3 years old. The main provider of behavior services is very resistant to seeing any of our kids. And that's something we would all love to see change, because I definitely think that this child could benefit from someone like that. And that's actually why we proceeded with the school transition meeting, because the school does have people that can help him with that, where I have very limited options on what to offer to that. But I love how you pointed out mom's priorities, because that was something I meant to touch on earlier, is like, you really have to take into consideration what is important to them. Because if him climbing on the fridge doesn't really bother the mom, then I can't really be the one who's like, no, that is a problem. It's a problem in my house, but if it's not a problem in her house, then it's not going to be a priority for her to fix it. And so you really have to base your list of commitments off of what is important to them, because if they don't want to see it change, or if they don't care about whether it changes or not, they're not going to do any of the things on the list to contribute to making it better.
Yeah. And you might need an IFSP review, like that might come out of it too as well. But I love it too, because I feel like in some sense, it's like an accountability partner, like for each other, like that you're doing too by writing.
Yes, and I think it's so important for the family to realize that you're not just coming there saying, I need you to do this and this and this and this, and then it will get better. Because then again, it goes back to feeling accusatory, like it's your fault that your kid isn't making progress, or it's your fault that your kid is like this. Where when you come together and you both make a list, it's like it's our trouble that we're working to fix together, versus a you problem. It's an our problem that we're working together to come to resolution with.
Yeah. So if you have questions, I'm going to go over some last minute information for you all and some resources. But if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in chat. And again, here's Micah's contact information. And again, I want to thank you, Micah. But let me go over a couple of things. If you're interested in facilitating an SC chat in the future, you can send an email to either myself or Corey Hill and just let us know that you're interested, and we'll touch base with you. Also, for those that don't know, the Division of Early Childhood, they are an international member organization that supports birth through age 8 with families with children with disabilities. And they have a service coordination community of practice. Seth just dropped that link, and it's free and anyone's welcome to join. So if that's something, if you want to kind of collaborate and network with service coordinators in other states, that would be a great opportunity to do so. And stay tuned for more SC chats in 2023. If you can go ahead and check your inbox, you will see a survey there. You're going to take your survey. Once you've completed that survey, you can download the certificate that will give your professional development hour today. So again, we thank you all for being here today. And thank you, Micah, so much for doing this SC Chats with us. It was such a pleasure having you and sharing your experiences and your education with us.
Thanks so much.